At 17, he and his little sister were evicted with nothing. But a strange inheritance, a worthless plot of land, and a $5 key led them to a hidden secret that would force them to redefine what family and home truly mean. If you've ever felt like the world has locked a door on you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This community is for people who know what it's like to have to find your own key. The sound I remember most is the click. Not the slam of the door, not the landlord's final irritated sigh, but the small metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. It was a sound of absolute finality, a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't even finished reading. On one side of that door was the last 2 years of my life. On the other was me, my 12-year-old sister Maya, and 4 black trash bags that held everything we owned. The November air was damp and smelled of diesel fumes and decaying leaves. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite at your skin. It seeped into your bones, a deep, wearying chill that felt like it was coming from the inside out. Maya stood beside me, her small hand clutching the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles were white. She wasn't crying. She'd learned long ago that tears didn't change anything. Instead, she just stared at the peeling paint on the door, her expression blank, as if she were trying to memorize it, to understand how something so familiar could suddenly become so alien. "What do we do now, Leo?" she asked, her voice a small puff of white in the gray air. It was the question I'd been dreading for weeks, the one that had been a low hum of panic beneath every waking thought. I was 17. In 6 months, I'd be a legal adult, a man by the state's definition. But right then, standing on a cracked sidewalk with my sister's frightened eyes on me, I had never felt younger or more useless. I pulled the collar of my thin jacket up around my neck. "I don't know," I said, and the honesty of it felt like swallowing glass. "But we'll figure it out, I promise." It was a promise I had no idea how to keep. We were a rounding error in the system, a file in a cabinet. Our foster parents, the Hendersons, had given their 30 days' notice. They were moving to Florida to be closer to their grandkids, they'd said. It wasn't malicious, it was just life. We were a temporary arrangement, and our time was up. The day before the click, we were in the office of Ms. Albright, our caseworker. Her office always smelled like stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaner, a smell I associated with bad news. The walls were covered in children's drawings, bright, hopeful crayon pictures of suns and houses with smiling stick figures. They felt like a cruel joke. Ms. Albright looked tired. She always looked tired. Her eyes had permanent purple smudges beneath them, and her smile never quite reached them. "Leo," she'd said, pushing a thin manila envelope across her desk, "I'm still working on a placement for Maya. It's difficult to keep siblings together, you know that." I knew that. I knew all the excuses. I knew the statistics. "And for you," she continued, her voice softening, "with your 18th birthday so close, the options are limited. A group home, maybe, or a transitional living program." She said the words like they were items on a grocery list, necessities no one was happy about buying. I just stared at the envelope. My name was typed on it, alongside a return address for a law firm I'd never heard of. "What's this?" I asked. "It came for you. For both of you, technically. It's from your grandfather's estate." I flinched. Grandfather. The word felt strange, like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. Arthur Vance. He was my mother's father, a man we hadn't seen since I was 5. He was a ghost, a name in a story my mom would sometimes tell. Her voice tight with a mix of anger and something that sounded a lot like sadness. He sent a birthday card once, for my 7th birthday. No money, just a picture of a bridge and the words, "Keep building," signed at the bottom. Then, nothing. "He's dead?" Maya asked from the chair beside me, her small voice cutting through the sterile office air. Ms. Albright nodded. "I'm sorry. He passed away a few months ago. The lawyers have been trying to locate you." I picked up the envelope. It was light, almost empty. There would be no surprise fortune, no long-lost inheritance to save us. People like us didn't get happy endings like that. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a small cardboard box. The paper was a deed. It granted ownership of a plot of land, 0.1 acres in a town I'd never heard of called Havenwood, to Leo and Maya Vance. A note from the lawyer was clipped to it. "Mr. Vance's remaining assets were liquidated to cover his debts," it read. "This property, being of negligible value, is his sole bequest." Negligible value. The words hung in the air. He left us a piece of worthless dirt. I almost laughed. It was so perfectly, tragically on brand for our lives. I opened the small box. Nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton was a single, old-fashioned key. It was heavy, made of dark, tarnished brass. Tucked beneath it was a folded, yellowing piece of notepaper, the handwriting spidery and thin. "This key cost me $5 at a hardware store 30 years ago," it read. "It's the best investment I ever made. It opens the only thing of value I have left to give you. Be brave, Arthur." A $5 key and a patch of dirt. That was our inheritance. That was our safety net. Back on the sidewalk, the cold was getting worse. The sun was beginning to set, painting the undersides of the clouds a bruised purple. We couldn't stay here. I looked at the bus schedule I'd pulled from my pocket. There was a bus leaving in an hour that went north, a long meandering route that stopped in a dozen dying towns. One of them was a 10-mile walk from a place called Havenwood. "We have a place to go," I told Maya, trying to make my voice sound confident, like I knew what I was doing. "We have land." She looked up at me, her brow furrowed. "Land? Like a yard?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Something like that. A place of our own." She seemed to consider this. Her trust in me was a physical weight, a heavy, precious thing I was terrified of breaking. After a moment, she nodded. "Okay, Leo, a place of our own." The bus ride was 8 hours of rattling windows and the smell of recycled air. We sat in the back, the trash bags piled on the seat next to us. Maya fell asleep after the first hour, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing soft and even. I watched the city lights give way to the sprawling, anonymous suburbs, and then to the dark, empty stretches of country. The bus groaned and hissed at each stop, picking up or dropping off solitary figures who looked as tired and lost as I felt. I stared out the window at my own reflection, a pale, ghostly face superimposed over the dark, rushing landscape. I was angry. I was angry at the Hendersons for their casual abandonment, at Ms. Albright for her weary resignation, at my parents for dying and leaving us in this mess. But most of all, I was angry at Arthur Vance. This ghost of a grandfather who, after a lifetime of silence, had reached out from the grave to hand us, what? A joke? A final, cruel twist of the knife? He left us a piece of land he knew was worthless. He left us a key to nothing. It felt less like a gift and more like a test, a riddle I was too tired and too scared to solve. What kind of man does that? What kind of man abandons his family, lets his grandchildren drift through the system, and then leaves them a legacy of dirt and a cryptic note? Be brave, the words echoed in my head. It was easy to write "be brave" on a piece of paper. It was a lot harder to live it when you were 17, on a bus to nowhere, with your little sister's entire world resting on your shoulders. We arrived in Havenwood just after dawn. The town was less a town and more a collection of buildings clinging to the side of a highway, like barnacles on a dying whale. A gas station with flickering fluorescent lights, a boarded-up diner, a post office, and a handful of houses with sagging porches and peeling paint. The air was sharp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the city's perpetual exhaust fumes. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic sigh, leaving us in a cloud of diesel smoke and profound silence. The man behind the counter at the gas station was old, with a face like a worn leather glove and eyes that had seen too many winters. I bought a coffee and a stale donut, and asked him if he knew of a plot of land once owned by Arthur Vance. He squinted at me. Old man Arthur? Sure. Lived out by the old rail spur. Strange fella. Kept to himself. He gave me a suspicious look. You family? Grandkids, I said. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. Well, his land ain't much, just a patch of weeds. Folks call it Arthur's Folly. He bought it from the county for back taxes years ago. No one could ever figure out why. He gave us directions that were simple enough. Follow the main road out of town, take the old service road by the defunct lumber mill, and walk until we hit the abandoned railway tracks. His property was the little square of nothing right beside them. The walk was longer than I expected, nearly 3 miles down a cracked and potholed asphalt road. The sun was up now, but it offered little warmth. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. Tall pines clawed at a pale sky, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of our shoes on the gravel shoulder and the cawing of crows. Maya was quiet, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. She pointed at a deer that darted across the road ahead of us, its white tail a flash of panic. For a moment, she looked like a normal kid on an adventure, and the tightness in my chest eased just a fraction. We found the railway tracks, 2 rusted lines of steel disappearing into the trees in either direction. And next to them, just as the gas station attendant had described, was our inheritance, Arthur's Folly. It was a small, square plot of land, maybe 50 feet by 50 feet, overgrown with thorny bushes and skeletal weeds. It was hemmed in on one side by the tracks, and on the other 3 by dense, dark woods. There was no house, no shed, yard. I didn't know what to say. The hope was gone. "Is this it?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is this our yard?" I didn't know what to say. The hope I had been carefully nursing for the past 8 hours withered and died. We were standing in the middle of nowhere, with nothing. I was about to suggest we turn back, to walk back to town and call Ms. Albright and beg her to put us in a shelter, to put us anywhere, when I saw it. In the center of the plot, almost completely hidden by the overgrown brush, was a flat slab of concrete. And set into the concrete was a heavy, rust-streaked steel door, flush with the ground, like the entrance to a storm cellar or a bunker. A thick, welded handle was bolted to one side, and next to it, a heavy-duty lock mechanism, the metal gleaming and new, a stark contrast to the decay surrounding it. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled in my pocket for the small cardboard box. My fingers were numb with cold as I took out the tarnished brass key. It felt heavy, real. I knelt down, my knees soaking through my jeans from the damp ground, and cleared away the dead leaves and dirt from the lock. It opens the only thing of value I have left to give you. I pushed the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. For a second, I hesitated. I was afraid. Afraid of what I would find, and even more afraid of finding nothing at all. I looked at Maya, who was watching me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hope. I couldn't let her down. I took a deep breath and turned the key. There was a loud, satisfying thunk as the mechanism disengaged. I grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. The door was incredibly heavy, and for a moment it didn't budge. I braced my feet, put my back into it, and pulled again, grunting with the effort. With a deep groan of protesting metal, the door began to lift. A wave of cool, musty air washed over my face. It smelled of damp earth, of stone, and something else I couldn't place. A clean, sharp scent, like the air after a lightning strike. I propped the heavy door open and peered down. A set of steep concrete steps descended into perfect, absolute darkness. I took out my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut a shaky white cone through the black, illuminating a space that made no sense. It wasn't a cellar. It was a tunnel. A perfectly round, concrete-lined tunnel, about 10 feet in diameter, stretching away from the bottom of the stairs into the gloom, far beyond the reach of my phone's weak light. The walls were smooth, the floor was clean and dry. It looked like a section of a massive, modern drainage pipe, or a subway tunnel. It was impossible. It shouldn't be here, under a worthless patch of land in the middle of nowhere. "What is it?" Maya whispered, peering over my shoulder. "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But I think this is it, the thing of value." We made our way carefully down the steps. The air grew cooler as we descended. At the bottom, I swept the light around. The tunnel stretched in one direction, seemingly endlessly. In the other, it ended in a solid concrete wall, about 20 feet from the base of the stairs. And bolted to that wall, at eye level, was a small gray metal box, like a circuit breaker panel. It had a simple latch, but it was secured with a small padlock. This had to be the next step. I looked around on the floor, and my light caught the glint of something metallic. A crowbar, left leaning against the wall, as if waiting for us. It took only a few seconds of leverage to snap the cheap padlock. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I opened the metal door. A letter. The same spidery handwriting as a letter. The same spidery handwriting as the note with the key. "Leo and Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, then you found my key. You found my folly, and you were brave enough to open the door. I am sorry. Those are the first words I owe you. I am sorry for not being there. I am sorry for the silence. I hope after you read this, you will begin to understand why." I sat down on the cold concrete steps, Maya huddled beside me, and I began to read my grandfather's story. He had been a civil engineer, he wrote, a good one. He designed bridges and tunnels for the state. He loved his work, loved the elegant physics of it, the permanence of concrete and steel. He was proud of what he built. But then he discovered something rotten. The company he worked for, a massive construction firm called Stone Ridge Properties, was cutting corners. They were using substandard materials, falsifying safety reports, and bribing inspectors to look the other way on major public works projects. The tunnels he designed were being built to fail. The bridges were death traps waiting to happen. He gathered evidence, compiled a report, and took it to the authorities. He was a whistleblower, and for his trouble, Stone Ridge destroyed him. They buried the investigation with their army of lawyers. They blacklisted him from the industry, ensuring he would never work as an engineer again. They harassed him, drained his finances with legal battles, and threatened his family, my mother, and by extension, us. He became a pariah. My mother, caught between a father she loved and the fear of what his fight was costing them, eventually cut ties. "It was for our safety," he wrote. "He had to become a ghost to keep the wolves away from our door." But he never stopped watching over us, from a distance. When my parents died, he tried to get custody, but the system, influenced by the whispers from his old enemies, deemed him an unstable and unsuitable guardian. So he did the only thing he could. He started building. He used what little money he had to buy this worthless plot of land because he knew a secret. He had designed this tunnel years ago. It was a decommissioned utility conduit for the old railway, forgotten on every official map. It was a ghost, just like him. For 10 years, he worked in secret, using his engineering skills and the last of his savings. He sealed off this section, installed a hidden ventilation system that tapped into an old railway air shaft, drilled a deep well for fresh water, and ran a shielded cable to an old, forgotten power line. He couldn't leave us money. Stone Ridge's lawyers would have found a way to take it. He couldn't leave us a house. It could be seized for back taxes. So he left us a place that officially didn't exist. A secret foundation. A home no one could ever take away from us. I looked up from the letter, my eyes blurry with tears. Beneath it were detailed architectural plans. They showed this wasn't just a tunnel, it was a home. He had partitioned the long space into rooms, a small living area, 2 tiny bedrooms, a bathroom with a composting toilet, a kitchen space with a propane stove. At the far end, behind a false wall, was a utility room with a generator, a water filtration system, and shelves stocked with tools and supplies. He had thought of everything. I cried then. I sat on those cold, concrete steps in the dark, and I cried for the grandfather I had never known, this brilliant, broken man who had spent the last decade of his life building a secret kingdom for the grandchildren he was forced to abandon. I cried for the injustice that had crushed him, and for the fierce, stubborn love that had driven him to this incredible, insane act. Maya didn't say anything. She just wrapped her small arms around my neck and held on tight. Her warmth was the only thing that felt real. When the tears finally subsided, a cold, hard anger began to settle in my gut. It wasn't just grief I was feeling. It was rage. They hadn't just destroyed him. They had stolen him from us. "It's a house, Leo," Maya whispered, her voice full of awe as she looked at the plans spread out on the floor. "He built us a house." Her simple, trusting statement cut through my storm of emotions. A house. It was a tunnel, a concrete tube buried under a field of weeds. It was probably illegal, definitely unsafe by any normal standard, and completely insane. But she was right. It was a house, and it was ours. But could we live here? The thought was terrifying. Living off the grid, hiding from the world. What about school for Maya? What about doctors, friends, a normal life. The alternative, however, was worse. Me in a group home, her bounced to another stranger's house. Separated, at the mercy of the system that had failed us again and again. Here, at least, we would be together. Here, we had a door with a key that was ours. I looked at the plans again, at the meticulous detail, the careful thought that went into every line. This wasn't the work of a crazy old man. This was the work of a brilliant engineer. It was the work of a grandfather protecting his family in the only way he knew how. The weight of his sacrifice, of his hidden love, settled onto my shoulders, and it was heavier than any burden I had ever carried. It was the weight of a legacy. This place wasn't just a shelter, it was a responsibility. It was a story I was now a part of. But as I sat there, trying to process the enormity of it all, I realized something. This wasn't just a choice about where to live, it was a choice about who I was going to be. Was I going to be the scared kid who ran from a fight? Or was I going to be Arthur Vance's grandson? Listen, if you've made it this far, you know this isn't just a story about finding a weird place. It's about what you do when you're given a choice that isn't really a choice at all. It's about standing at a crossroads where one path is easy and leads back to a life you know, even if it's a painful one, and the other path leads into the dark, into the unknown. Have you ever been pushed into a corner and had to find a door nobody else could see? Let me know in the comments. Your story matters, and I read every single one. I promise you that. We have to be there for each other when the world tries to tell us there are no doors left to open. Now, let's get back to what we found next, because the letter wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Deeper in the waterproof pouch, beneath the plans and the journal, was another, newer-looking folder. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was filled with legal documents, photocopied articles, and handwritten notes. It was my grandfather's research. For the last 10 years, he hadn't just been building. He had been watching. He had been gathering new evidence against Stone Ridge properties, documenting their more recent crimes. Environmental violations, fraudulent billing on city contracts, political bribery. It was all there, meticulously organized. And then I saw the last document, and a cold dread washed over me. It was a letter addressed to the current landowner of his plot. It was from Stone Ridge Properties. They were planning a massive luxury housing development in the area. They had acquired all the surrounding land, and Arthur's Folly was the last holdout. The letter was a formal offer, $5,000 for the deed. It was dated 2 weeks ago. At the bottom, a sentence was underlined in red ink. Should you decline our generous offer, please be advised that we will be petitioning the county to acquire the land via eminent domain for the purposes of regional economic development. They wanted our land. They didn't know what was underneath it, of course. To them, it was just a final, irritating loose end to tie up. But they were coming for it. The people who had destroyed my grandfather were now, unknowingly, trying to destroy the last thing he had built to protect us. The choice became terrifyingly clear. We could take the $5,000, a fortune to us right now, and disappear. We could find a small apartment somewhere, try to build a normal life. It was the sensible option, the safe option. Or we could stay. We could fight. We could pick up the battle that my grandfather had lost, a battle that had cost him everything. Fighting meant exposing his secret, risking the only home we had. It meant taking on a corporate giant with unlimited resources. It was an insane, impossible choice. I looked at Maya. She was tracing the lines of the tunnel on the blueprints with her finger, a small, hopeful smile on her face. She wasn't thinking about corporations or legal battles. She was thinking about having her own room. She was thinking about being safe with her brother. She was thinking about home. And in that moment, I knew. I couldn't run. My grandfather didn't spend a decade in the dark building a sanctuary just so I could sell it for pocket money. He didn't leave me a legacy of courage just so I could be a coward. "We're staying," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We're going to make this our home, and we're going to fight for it." The first few weeks were a strange mix of fear and wonder. We began the process of turning the tunnel into a home. We explored every inch of it, from the humming generator room to the deep storage alcoves my grandfather had carved out of the earth. It was like living inside a secret. The air had a constant, cool temperature and always smelled faintly of clean stone and ozone from the air filtration system. The only sound was the low hum of the ventilator, a constant, reassuring white noise. We found the crates he had left for us. They were filled with non-perishable food, blankets, clothes in various sizes, books, board games, and even art supplies. He had anticipated our every need. One afternoon, Maya found a can of white paint and some brushes. Without even asking, she started painting on the curved concrete walls of the main living area. She painted a huge, sprawling sun, its rays stretching down the length of the tunnel. She painted trees and birds and a bright blue sky. She was painting the world we were missing, bringing the outside in. Her murals transformed the gray utilitarian space into something magical, something that was uniquely ours. It was bizarre, living in this beautiful, impossible place. But it was the first time in years I felt a sense of peace. We were safe. We were together. But we couldn't stay hidden forever. We needed fresh food, supplies, and a plan. I started making trips into Havenwood, walking the 3 miles every few days with a backpack. At first, the town felt cold and unwelcoming. The few people I encountered looked through me, another transient kid passing through. But slowly, things started to change. I started shopping at the small, dusty general store run by a gruff man named Sal. He was a man of few words, but he started saving the day-old bread for me, selling it for a quarter. "For your sister," he'd grunt, never making eye contact. I started spending time at the town library, a small, warm building that smelled of old paper and wood smoke. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, let me use the internet for free. She saw me reading books on property law and civil engineering, and instead of asking questions, she started leaving stacks of relevant books on my table. She'd ask about Maya, about whether she was keeping up with her schoolwork. I told her I was homeschooling her, and she gave me a curriculum guide and a stack of workbooks, no questions asked. Through these small, quiet interactions, I started to piece together a different picture of my grandfather. The people in town hadn't seen him as a crazy recluse. They saw him as quiet, private, but kind. Sal told me how Arthur had helped him fix his generator during a bad ice storm and refused to take any money. Mrs. Gable told me how he'd anonymously donated a set of new encyclopedias to the library. He wasn't a ghost here. He was a part of the community, in his own silent, watchful way. He had been building more than just a tunnel. He had been building a network of quiet allies. And I realized We weren't as alone as I thought. Using the library's computer, I found the name of a legal aid lawyer my grandfather had mentioned in his journal. Her name was Evelyn Reed. I spent the last $40 we had on a burner phone and called her. Her voice was sharp, tired, and skeptical. "Arthur Vance?" she said. "Yes, I remember the name. He contacted me about a year ago, sent me a box of documents. Frankly, Mr. Vance, the case is cold. The statute of limitations has passed on most of it." "There's new evidence," I said, my voice cracking. I told her everything, about the tunnel, about the new documents, about the offer from Stone Ridge. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought she was going to hang up. "You're living in a utility tunnel?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes." "And Stone Ridge is trying to take the land?" "Yes." Another pause. "Bring me the documents," she finally said. "I'll look at them. No promises." 2 days later, I was on another bus, this time to the county seat, a larger town an hour away. Evelyn Reed's office was small and cluttered, wedged between a bail bondsman and a pawn shop. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that looked like they could spot a lie from a mile away. I laid my grandfather's folder on her desk. She spent nearly an hour reading, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at me. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," she said, her voice softer now. "He was right. This new evidence of fraud and environmental contamination, this is recent. This is actionable." For the first time, a real sliver of hope cut through my fear. "So you'll help us?" "I'll do more than that," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "I'm going to make some calls. I think the State Attorney General's office might be very interested in what old Arthur dug up." But things were about to get a lot more complicated. When I got back to Havenwood, there was a black sedan parked by the service road near our plot of land. A man in an expensive-looking suit was standing there, staring at the overgrown property. He had the slick, predatory look of a man who was used to getting his way. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies, a representative from Stone Ridge Properties. "Leo Vance?" he said, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "We've been trying to reach you. You haven't responded to our offer." "I'm not interested," I said, my heart pounding. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Look, kid, it's a worthless patch of dirt. We're offering you $5,000. That's more than it's worth. Take the money. Give your sister a fresh start somewhere. It's the smart play." "It's not for sale." His smile vanished. "Don't be a fool. We will get this land, one way or another. We have the best lawyers in the state. We have the county board in our pocket. You are a 17-year-old kid with nothing. What do you have?" I thought of my grandfather's letter. I thought of Maya's murals on the concrete walls. I thought of the $5 key in my pocket. "I have a home," I said, and turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in his expensive suit, a look of pure fury on his face. The battle had begun. The next few months were a blur of legal maneuvering and quiet fear. Evelyn Reed was true to her word. She filed an injunction to halt the eminent domain proceedings, citing my grandfather's newly discovered evidence. The State Attorney General's office, smelling blood in the water, launched a formal investigation into Stone Ridge Properties. Suddenly, our little fight was on the local news. "Orphan teens in tunnel home fight corporate giant." The story was sensational, but it got people's attention. Reporters started showing up in Havenwood, trying to find us. But the townspeople, led by a fiercely protective Sal and Mrs. Gable, closed ranks. They told the reporters they hadn't seen us, that we were just some kids who had passed through. They protected our secret. Stone Ridge fought back, hard. They sent private investigators to dig up dirt on my grandfather, on my parents, on me. They tried to paint us as squatters, as delinquents. Their lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to bankrupt us with legal fees. But Evelyn Reed, working pro bono, matched them every step of the way. She was relentless. The pressure was immense. There were nights I'd lie awake on my cot in the quiet dark of the tunnel, the weight of it all crushing me. I was terrified of losing, terrified of failing my sister, of failing my grandfather's memory. During those times, Maya was my anchor. She seemed oblivious to the legal storm raging above our heads. Her world was the tunnel, her murals, the books Mrs. Gable sent home with me. Her unwavering belief that this was our home and that everything would be okay was the only thing that kept me going. The turning point came from my grandfather's journal. I was reading it one night, looking for anything else that might help, when I found a strange entry. He mentioned an old friend, a fellow engineer named Ben Carter, who had been fired from Stone Ridge around the same time he was. He wrote that Ben knew where the bodies were buried. Evelyn and I spent a week trying to find him. We finally located him living in a retirement community 3 states away. He was old and frail, but when Evelyn told him about us, about Arthur's grandchildren continuing his fight, he agreed to talk. He provided a sworn affidavit that corroborated everything my grandfather had claimed, and more. He had kept his own copies of the falsified safety reports for a bridge Stone Ridge had built a decade earlier, a bridge that was still in use. That was the final nail in their coffin. Faced with a federal investigation and a massive public safety scandal, Stone Ridge Properties crumbled. Their stock plummeted. Their CEO resigned. And, in a quiet legal notice, they officially withdrew their petition for our land. We had won. One evening, a few weeks later, Evelyn Reed drove out to Havenwood. She walked with me to the plot of land, and I showed her the entrance, the key, the door. I didn't take her inside. That was our secret. But I told her about it. She handed me a thick envelope. Inside was the official, updated deed to the property, free and clear, in my name and Maya's. There was also a cashier's check. It was a settlement from a class-action lawsuit against Stone Ridge that my grandfather had unknowingly been a part of. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a new generator. Enough for college someday. Enough for a future. "Your grandfather would be proud, Leo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He started a fight he knew he couldn't win in his lifetime. He did it for you." Standing there, on our small patch of land, the deed in my hand, I finally understood. My grandfather's inheritance wasn't the tunnel. It wasn't the land. It was the fight. It was the stubborn, unbreakable belief that you stand up for what's right, even if it costs you everything. A home isn't just 4 walls and a roof. I had learned that living in a concrete tube. A home is a place you can't be kicked out of. It's a place of safety, of belonging, a foundation on which to build a life. My grandfather hadn't just given us a shelter. He had given us a foundation. And he hadn't just given us a key to a tunnel. He had given me the key to my own life, to my own agency. I looked at the old brass key in my hand, the $5 investment. He was right. It was the best investment he ever made. Not because of what it opened, but because of what it represented. It was the idea that you could find value where no one else could see it. It was the proof that sometimes the only way forward is to find a hidden door and have the courage to walk through it. We decided to stay. The tunnel would always be our sanctuary, our secret. But we were ready to live in the light too. Using some of the settlement money, I hired a local contractor, a friend of Sal's, and we started building a small, simple cabin on the concrete slab right over the entrance. It had big windows that let in the sun, and a porch where Maya could sit and draw the trees. We were building a life on the foundation my grandfather had laid for us, a life that was both hidden and open, rooted in the past, but reaching for the future. My grandfather spent the last years of his life building a place he would never live in, for two kids he barely knew. He was trying to fix a mistake, to give us a second chance. He was trying to give us a home. And it makes me think, what are we building for the people who come after us? What foundations are we laying, in secret, that might one day save someone we love? What doors are we creating for them to open? Because the world can be a cold, hard place. It will try to lock you out, to tell you that you're worthless, that you have nothing. But my sister and I are proof that inheritance isn't about money. It's about the strength and the stories that are passed down to us. It's about the love that builds foundations in the dark. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your place in the world, or discovered a strength you inherited from someone you lost, please share your story in the comments below. This channel is a community for people who understand that the most valuable things are never the ones with a price tag. Subscribe for more stories about finding home in the most unexpected of places. And never, ever underestimate the power of a $5 key. A few years later, Maya and I stood on our land. She was taller, a teenager now, her artwork hanging on the walls of our little cabin. We were planting a small sapling near the porch. Below our feet, beneath the new wooden deck, was the steel door. It was still there, our secret history, our silent guardian. The sun was warm on our faces, and the wind whispered through the tall pines. We were home.